For problem number 10, just a way for you to add some points back to your Unit 3 test. No, Unit 2 test. It's actually a Unit 2 test add-on. Anyway, you're going to first go to the y equals, and you're going to type that in. You're going to type in this function here, x cubed, so that's x up caret 3 minus 4x squared plus 1.5. And then, since you're trying to find relative mins, maxes, and behavior zeros, we're going to need to graph that. But the thing I would do here is I'd push zoom 6 to see if I can find that graph in my standard viewing window. And I'm hoping, and yes, we got the graph in the standard viewing window. And so the first thing I want to do is find, notice here that I have a relative max and a relative min. There are no absolute mins or maxes, and so I can go ahead and add in there are no absolute mins and maxes. So none. Write that down so I don't get confused. I can also go ahead and, let's do it over here. I can look at this and notice that as x approaches negative infinity, y also approaches negative infinity, and as x approaches positive infinity, y approaches positive infinity. So I notice that I have 3 zeros, and I have one relative max and one relative min. So let's find the relative max first. So we do second calculate, and we're trying to find a max here, so we want to calculate the max. So we can scroll down and hit 4, scroll down to the 4 and hit enter. And what it's asking here is for the left bound. Move the cursor somewhere to the left of that high point and hit enter, and then move the cursor somewhere to the right of that high point and hit enter, and then move the cursor anywhere in between those two vertical lines that you see there on your calculator. And we can see that this x value here, let me zoom in a little bit here, the x value of, it says negative 8.44e minus 8. Well, that just means negative 8.4 times 10 to the negative 8, which we've talked about that before, and that really is relatively 0. In fact, when you round that number to the nearest 3 digits, it is 0. So we're going to replace that number with an ugly number with just 0, and y equals 1.5. We can see we have a relative min at 0, sorry, that's a max, at 0, comma, 1.5. That's how we find our relative max. So now we want to find our relative min. And we do repeat that process, except that after we hit second calculate, we're going to hit, we could just type a 3, or like I said, you can scroll down to that 3 and hit enter. And we're being asked for a left bound, so we want to surround that low point, and once we get the cursor to the left of that low point, we hit enter, and then it's asking us now for a right bound. So then we move the cursor somewhere to the right of that low point, and we hit enter again, and all we have to do is move the cursor somewhere in between the two vertical lines and hit enter for our guess. And it shows us that we have 2.667, so we're going to go ahead and round our answer to the nearest 3 digits, 2.667, comma, and then we have negative 7.981, negative 0.79. Let me do this so I can see it at the same time I'm writing it down. Negative 7.981, and that's our y value of the relative minimum. Okay, so that takes care of the relative max, relative min, and then the zeros, that's just calculating zeros. So let's go ahead and do that. Second calculate, and you can see it right there. Number 2 is 0. You're going to move the cursor to the left of that first 0, enter. You're going to move the cursor to the right of the first 0. Now, if you move it way to the right, you may have some trouble because there's 2 zeros in between those two. But if you happen to do that, don't worry about it. In fact, I'll do that. Then just move the guess. If you want the first 0, move the guess to close to the first 0. and we can see we have negative 5.73. Negative 0.573. I'm going to list them not as coordinates, but as just as zeros, as numbers. And then here's something else that you can do. I'll show you a little trick here. Second calculate 0. Instead of moving the cursor, if you're comfortable knowing that each one of these little tick marks on the x-axis represents 1 unit, then you can actually just type in a number. So left bound, we can see that you know what, I'll save that for the next one. I'll explain why in a second. So the left bound, we have the cursor to the left of that 0, and the right bound, we're moving the cursor to the right, and then we move the cursor back up for our guess, and we hit enter, and we can see we have 0.671, so 0.671 is our second 0. So here's where I'll show you a little trick. It's not necessarily a trick, but it's something that'll save you time. We want that third 0. Second calculate, down arrow enter, or just to hit the 2. But notice that third 0 is way out here, and if you count the little tick marks, you see 1, tell if that's, yeah, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that third 0 looks like it's right around 4, and so my left bound, I could easily determine that if I type a 2, notice that it marks 2. So I can just type a number that I know is to the left of that to the left of that 0, and then I notice that 2, 3, 4, that 5 for sure would be to the right of that 0. So it's asking me for a right bound. I could just type a 5, enter, and now I have a right boundary for that, and it looks again looks very close to 4. So I'm just going to type a 4. Instead of moving the cursor, I'm going to type a 4 and hit enter, and sure enough, it's very close to 4. So that's just a quick way of identifying your left bound, right bound, and then your guess. 3.901 would be our third and final 0, 3.901.